April 7, 1941. Coastal airfields in Kent. The first British bombers roared into the sky, engines slicing through the tense silence. Pilots gripped their controls, each instrument and dial a lifeline. From the ground, Luftwaffe crews scrambled, alarms blaring, but confusion spread faster than the sirens could pierce. Explosions erupted on the German installations along the Channel coast. Barrage after barrage landed with exacting precision, each strike meticulously timed. British formations moved with disciplined synchronicity. Every maneuver, every pull on the throttle, had been drilled for months. On the ground, German soldiers and airmen ducked, stumbled, and panicked. Machines meant to defend them became obstacles as men scattered. The raiders were unseen until the destruction began. It was a display of calculated terror. The British had prepared for this moment with methodical patience. And now, the first blow had landed. Across the coast, the enemy realized they were not merely under attack, they were being orchestrated into chaos. The full weight of the precision strike was only beginning to make itself known. By early 1941, Britain had shifted from defense to a cautious, calculated offense. The Battle of Britain had ended months earlier, leaving the RAF with lessons etched into every squadron. Radar stations along the coast had proven their worth, and British airfields had become hubs of both vigilance and preparation. Across the Channel, German forces believed their positions secure, their coastal installations well guarded and their Luftwaffe fighters confident. Yet British intelligence had noted gaps, weak points in radar coverage, stretches of coastline lightly defended, and crews untrained for sudden, precise raids. RAF Bomber Command had begun to design a strategy that relied on accuracy, timing, and coordination rather than sheer numbers. Each pilot underwent rigorous simulations of potential sorties. Maps were studied with relentless attention to detail. Target coordinates were verified and re-verified. The goal was not random destruction, it was precision impact, hitting supply depots, gun emplacements, and communications centers in rapid succession. British leadership understood that well-executed strikes could paralyze the enemy's operational rhythm, even before reinforcements could react. In London, discussions in the Air Ministry reflected cautious optimism. Planners debated the risks of sending crews across the Channel. Every sortie carried danger, yet intelligence indicated the Germans' confidence was overextended. This raid, carefully timed and coordinated, would demonstrate Britain's growing mastery of the air war. Behind the scenes, pilots trained relentlessly. Flight simulators were limited, but crews used charts and models to rehearse bombing runs. Squadrons synchronized watches to the second. The men understood that any misstep could cost lives. Yet confidence in their preparation was high. They had studied German formations, airfield defenses, and anti-aircraft placements. Every variable was considered. German commanders, meanwhile, had underestimated British capabilities. Reports of reconnaissance flights had been logged, but many were dismissed as routine patrols. The Luftwaffe, experienced in offensive strikes over Europe, believed that coastal defenses were sufficient. Communication between posts was fragmented, leaving gaps that would soon be exploited. The British understood this vulnerability. Airfields along Kent were buzzing with activity. Mechanics fine-tuned engines while ground crews loaded munitions with precision. Pilots double-checked instruments and reviewed flight paths. The atmosphere was tense but disciplined. Leadership emphasized coordination, ensuring that each pilot knew not only their target but also the sequence in which the entire formation would strike. Timing was paramount. As April dawned, intelligence officers compiled final reports. Weather conditions were suitable for low-altitude precision strikes, reducing visibility for the enemy without complicating navigation. British planners calculated flight times, approach angles, and bomb release points with meticulous care. They had learned that overconfidence could be fatal. Success depended on preparation and discipline, not chance. The enemy remained unaware of the depth of planning underway. Coastal radar had blind spots. Anti-aircraft units lacked updated intelligence on the type and formation of incoming bombers. German crews assumed any attack would be sporadic, uncoordinated, or superficial. They had no reason to expect the precision and timing that the British had engineered. At the operational level, IAF Command issued final instructions. Each squadron had its own objectives, but all were interlinked in a synchronized attack. Communication protocols were reinforced, ensuring that in the chaos of battle, coordination would hold. Pilots were briefed on contingencies, escape routes, and emergency procedures. Confidence in training was the buffer against the unpredictability of war. The stage was set. Across the Channel, German defenses remained untested by a strike of this nature. British pilots, steady and methodical, prepared to execute a raid designed not only to destroy but to shock. When the first bombs would fall, the groundwork laid over weeks of preparation would turn planning into action. The calm before the storm was deliberate. Every move was calculated. And as the pilots climbed into their aircraft, each bearing the weight of training, strategy, and expectation, the enemy remained unaware that the first wave of a precision blitz was about to change the course of the morning. While British squadrons prepared along the Kent coast, German defences relied heavily on their radar network. The Freya and Wurzburg stations dotted the Channel coast, offering early warning against incoming attacks. Yet gaps existed, particularly along stretches where radar coverage overlapped unevenly. British intelligence had mapped these weaknesses with painstaking care, analyzing patrol patterns and response times. Every flaw represented an opportunity. RAF planners understood that exploiting these blind spots could mean the difference between confusion and effective counterfire. German troops manning coastal bunkers were well trained, but routine assignments had bred complacency. Many believed that an attack at that hour would be unlikely, expecting British strikes during daylight when visibility favored navigation. Commanders assumed any raid would be isolated, failing to anticipate the synchronization that British pilots had rehearsed for weeks. The disparity between assumption and reality set the stage for chaos. Across the Channel, British officers studied reconnaissance photos and intelligence reports. Targets were chosen not merely for tactical value but for psychological effect. Supply depots, communication centers, and airfield installations would be struck in rapid succession, creating a sense of omnipresence. Precision mattered. Indiscriminate bombing would reduce impact and waste resources. Squadrons were briefed on the importance of timing, altitude, and formation, ensuring that each element of the strike complemented the others. Selection of crews was a careful process. Experienced pilots led the formations, while younger aviators were assigned secondary roles under close supervision. Each aircraft had a specific window to release its payload. Any deviation could compromise the raid, yet confidence in training ran high. Crews understood that their success relied on discipline, coordination, and an unflinching commitment to the plan. Timing was crucial. Although the word dawn would later describe the hour of attack, planners focused on conditions rather than imagery. Reduced visibility favored surprise, but pilots needed to maintain navigation and orientation. Charts, compass bearings, and flight instruments were relied upon to maintain precision. British air strategy emphasized hitting key points with minimal exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Each sortie was a calculated risk. British leadership recognized the psychological element of warfare. Panic and disarray among enemy ranks could yield strategic advantages disproportionate to physical destruction. German command structures depended on swift and organized response. Confusion could ripple through communication lines, slowing reinforcement and recovery. RAF strategists understood that orchestrating fear was as important as orchestrating bombs. On the ground, Luftwaffe personnel continued routine drills, unaware of the imminent threat. Maintenance schedules, refueling operations, and communications checks gave an illusion of readiness. The contrast between perceived security and the reality of British planning highlighted a critical imbalance. RAF intelligence aimed to exploit this gap fully, ensuring that the first moments of the raid would define the outcome. Behind the British lines, meticulous rehearsal continued. Maps were updated, instruments calibrated, and last-minute adjustments made. Every variable, wind, altitude, approach path, timing, was considered. Crews were mentally prepared to follow their briefings to the letter. Contingency plans were in place, yet the objective remained simple: execute the strike with precision, overwhelm the enemy, and withdraw before effective retaliation. The convergence of intelligence, training, and opportunity set the stage for the first wave. Across the Channel, German forces were still unaware that their assumptions of security were about to be shattered. British planners had orchestrated a raid designed to paralyze, not merely damage, and every decision leading up to this point ensured that the strike would have maximum effect. By the moment the British bombers approached the coastline, the groundwork was complete. German radar would detect them too late, ground crews would react too slowly, and anti-aircraft positions would struggle to organize. The first explosions would ignite panic, demonstrating that preparation and strategy could dominate raw numbers. Britain's mastery of timing, coordination, and precision was ready to be tested. British success depended on meticulous planning. Weeks before the raid, Bomber Command analyzed every aspect of German defenses. Flight paths were calculated to the second, taking into account radar blind spots and anti-aircraft placements. Pilots and navigators rehearsed simulated bombing runs using maps and markers, refining each maneuver until it became instinctive. Ground crews coordinated with airfields to ensure munitions were loaded efficiently, instruments calibrated, and aircraft checked down to the last bolt. Leadership emphasized discipline and synchronization. Every squadron member knew the timing and sequence of the strike. Briefings drilled the importance of formation cohesion, communication, and split-second adjustments. The mission was rehearsed not in isolation but as an integrated operation where one error could jeopardize the entire effort. Confidence in preparation became a shield against uncertainty. Every pilot understood the stakes. The planning had to overcome not just enemy defenses but human fallibility. RAF officers believed that precise execution would yield results far beyond raw numbers, turning coordination and timing into a force multiplier. Aircraft selection played a critical role. British bombers such as the Blenheim and Wellington were chosen for a balance of speed, range, and payload capacity. Engine performance was scrutinized, with mechanics performing final tests to ensure no failure during flight. Armament was optimized for accuracy rather than indiscriminate damage, focusing on strategic points along the Channel coast. Pilots trained extensively with their machines, learning to exploit every feature. Handling, fuel management, and bomb release mechanisms were all rehearsed until reactions were automatic. Crews relied on instruments to navigate through minimal visibility, coordinating movement to maintain formation while preparing for the release of ordnance. The aircraft were more than vehicles, they were extensions of the pilot's skill. Each bomber acted as a precise instrument in the orchestration of the raid. Reliability, training, and synchronization with other machines allowed the strike to unfold with a level of precision that would overwhelm German defenses. The German forces were confident but untested in this scenario. Radar coverage had blind spots, and many anti-aircraft positions were underprepared for a coordinated strike at this hour. Officers assumed that any British attack would be sporadic, yet the reality of RAF planning exploited their assumptions. Ground crews reacted slowly under pressure, lacking experience with precision raids designed to induce panic rather than just destruction. German communication lines were fragmented, causing confusion when alarms sounded. The psychological impact of sudden, methodical destruction disrupted routine, leaving even well-trained soldiers disoriented. The disparity between German expectation and British execution created an opening that would define the raid. Explosions, followed by rapid successive strikes, transformed confidence into chaos. The enemy's inability to predict or counteract the British approach underscored the strategic advantage of preparation, timing, and intelligence-driven precision. The British raid was not random, it was the result of deliberate strategy. RAF planners understood that inflicting psychological disruption could be as decisive as physical destruction. By targeting supply depots, communication centers, and key airfield installations, The operation aimed to slow German operational response and create chaos within their command structures. Each formation had a clear objective, sequenced to maximize effect. The first strikes would draw attention, while subsequent waves exploited gaps in defense. Coordination with intelligence officers ensured that the attack hit where it would be most disruptive, not merely most visible. Timing, precision, and sequencing were orchestrated like a symphony, each squadron's movements synchronized to complement the others. Strategy also dictated risk management. British leaders balanced aggression with caution, ensuring that pilots could execute their objectives while minimizing unnecessary losses. The raid was a calculated gamble, leveraging planning and intelligence over brute force, demonstrating that mastery of timing and coordination could dominate even numerically superior opponents. Every sortie carried immense risk. Pilots crossed the channel knowing that anti-aircraft fire, mechanical failure, or miscalculated timing could be fatal. Flying low to avoid radar exposed them to gunfire, while maintaining formation required split-second judgment. The precision required left no margin for error. British planners mitigated risk through preparation. Pilots were extensively trained to anticipate contingencies, from evasive maneuvers to rapid navigation adjustments. Aircraft were carefully inspected, and instruments double-checked. Yet the inherent danger remained, creating a tension that tested both skill and resolve. Risk also extended to morale. Knowing the potential consequences of failure, pilots relied on discipline and trust in their squadrons. The combination of high stakes and careful planning intensified focus, forging crews into units capable of executing operations with near-mechanical precision. Behind the controls, British pilots embodied resolve. Months of training, briefings, and rehearsals coalesced into decisive action. Each pilot maintained focus despite the chaos unfolding below, trusting both machines and fellow crews. Discipline transformed fear into controlled execution. Leadership reinforced this mindset. Officers reminded crews that success relied not on luck, but on adherence to strategy and preparation. Pilots internalized this philosophy, understanding that hesitation could cost lives and compromise the operation. The human element, courage, determination, and composure, proved as critical as mechanical precision. RAF personnel executed each maneuver with unwavering focus, turning meticulous planning into tangible results. Their resolve amplified the effectiveness of the raid, ensuring that Britain's mastery of timing and coordination would leave a lasting impression on the enemy. April 7, 1941. The British bombers reached the Channel coastline. Engines hummed in tense synchrony. Every pilot adjusted throttle, angle, and altitude with precision. Seconds mattered. Formation maintained, they advanced toward the German positions. The first bombs were released. Supply depots erupted in controlled explosions. Crates of ammunition ignited, sending fire and smoke into the air. German crews scrambled, alarms piercing the morning silence. Confusion rippled through bunkers. Men ducked, stumbled, shouted. The calculated timing left no room for organized response. British pilots held their formation. The raid was designed for rapid succession. As one squadron withdrew, another descended on communications centers. Telegraph lines were severed, signal posts destroyed. Orders that might have coordinated a defense were now delayed or lost entirely. Every strike compounded the previous, amplifying panic and disarray. Anti-aircraft crews reacted too slowly. Miscommunication slowed firing adjustments. Some batteries discharged prematurely, wasting ammunition. Others hesitated, unsure of the attack scope. The RAF's prior reconnaissance had exploited these weaknesses. British airmen, trained to anticipate enemy behavior, adjusted course without breaking formation, ensuring each wave hit designated targets with exacting accuracy. Amid the chaos, leadership decisions were made in real time. Squadron leaders signaled changes, minor course corrections to maintain synchronization. Pilots executed them instantly. The raid's success depended on this discipline. Any deviation could have alerted German forces or allowed anti-aircraft fire to inflict damage. The psychological impact unfolded as rapidly as the explosions. German soldiers and airmen reacted not just to the destruction but to its predictability. They had been unprepared for the methodical nature of the strikes. Each detonation, each successive bombing, reinforced the perception of omnipresent control. Men fled, sought cover, or froze. The coordination of the attack transformed tactical success into strategic intimidation. Below, the wreckage of supply depots and communication posts painted a clear picture. British precision had dominated the moment. Every pilot, every bomber, executed their role without hesitation. The raid was unfolding as rehearsed, proving the value of preparation, discipline, and meticulous planning. At the edges of the operation, German commanders struggled to assess the situation. Radar picked up formations but offered little actionable intelligence. Reports from the ground were fragmented. Attempts to organize a counterattack were hampered by the chaos the British strike had already sown. Panic spread faster than orders, and hesitation became the enemy's default response. Despite the danger, British crews maintained focus. The initial strikes had been decisive, but the raid demanded continuous precision. Bombs continued to fall, each squadron following the timeline established before takeoff. Pilots anticipated shifts in enemy behavior, adjusting altitude and release points to maintain maximum impact. The orchestration of destruction became almost mechanical, yet it required constant human attention, judgment, and skill. By the midpoint of the raid, German defenses were paralyzed. Barrage guns fired sporadically, often hitting empty terrain or misaligned targets. Soldiers sought cover where no protection existed. Command lines were disrupted, leaving scattered units isolated and reactive. British airmen, in contrast, moved with deliberate cohesion, exploiting every lapse, every misstep. In the cockpit, there was no time for reflection, only execution. Every instrument reading, every visual cue mattered. Pilots synchronized their movements, ensuring that bomb drops followed the precise cadence required for maximum effect. Ground crews watched explosions with a mixture of shock and disbelief. The methodical nature of the strike defied expectation. The first phase of the raid reached its critical point. Strategic objectives had been hit. Panic and disorganization had crippled the enemy's immediate ability to respond. British bombers began coordinated withdrawal patterns, maintaining formation integrity while preparing for secondary targets. The intensity of the initial strikes had set the tone, but the operation was far from complete. The second wave descended with relentless precision. British bombers, synchronized to the second, targeted remaining German installations along the coast. Anti-aircraft fire was sporadic and ineffective, misdirected by earlier strikes. Pilots maintained formation, each aircraft a node in an intricate web of coordinated destruction. Communication centers erupted under concentrated bombing. Telegraph lines snapped, signaling equipment destroyed. Orders intended to organize counterattacks never reached frontline units. German soldiers scrambled, unsure of the scale of the raid. Panic compounded confusion, training gave way to instinctive survival. The precision of the British assault transformed routine defense into disorganized chaos. Supply depots became infernos. Crates of munitions, carefully stacked, ignited one after another. Pilots adjusted timing and release points to ensure maximum effect without overlap. Ground crews witnessed explosions unfolding like clockwork, each one hitting precisely as planned. The psychological impact was immediate. Fear replaced calculation, and hesitation crippled response. At higher command levels, German officers struggled to coordinate. Radar reported bombers crossing, but by the time observations reached headquarters, targets were already destroyed. Attempts to scramble fighter planes were delayed, mismanaged, and scattered. British leadership had anticipated this, planning their approach to exploit both mechanical and human vulnerabilities. Pilots pressed the advantage. They adjusted flight paths to strike remaining defensive positions while avoiding concentrated anti-aircraft zones. Every decision, every maneuver, was executed with meticulous discipline. The earlier panic among German troops amplified, leaving gunners firing blindly and soldiers fleeing positions. British crews remained composed, the product of rigorous training and a clear understanding of their objectives. The intensity of the raid reached its apex as secondary objectives were neutralized. Barracks, fuel depots, and radar stations were systematically targeted. Explosions echoed across the coastline, yet no structural collapse disrupted IAF formation. Each bomb found its mark, reinforcing the narrative of control and mastery. The British precision strike had become more than tactical, it was symbolic, demonstrating dominance over both terrain and enemy nerves. As withdrawal commenced, pilots executed calculated exit routes. Formation integrity remained unbroken, minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft retaliation. Every bomber maintained discipline, ensuring that success was not marred by avoidable losses. The raid had achieved its objectives: material destruction, disruption of command, and a psychological shock that would reverberate through German ranks. German commanders assessed the aftermath in real time. Reports were fragmented, conflicting, and incomplete. Panic had undermined coordination, leaving units isolated and ineffective. Attempts to reorganize were hampered by the speed and precision of the British operation. The effectiveness of the strike was evident not only in the material damage but in the enemy's stunned reaction. The final moments of the operation underscored British control. Pilots executed coordinated landings back at Kent airfields, instruments and aircraft intact. Ground crews awaited with relief, ready to service planes and prepare for further sorties. The operation had been a test of planning, discipline, and execution, and it had passed with distinction. By the end of the raid, German forces along the Channel coast were disoriented. Panic, confusion, and material damage combined to deliver a blow far greater than numbers alone could achieve. Britain had demonstrated that precision, preparation, and resolve could dominate even against an enemy confident in its defenses. The morning's events would linger in both strategy reports and soldiers' memories, a testament to the efficacy of careful orchestration. The immediate impact of the raid was unmistakable. German forces along the Channel coast were stunned, their operations disrupted, and morale shaken. Supply depots lay in ruins, communications lines severed, and radar stations damaged or destroyed. Reports from ground units conveyed a common theme: panic had spread faster than the explosions themselves. Soldiers and airmen struggled to re-establish order amidst the chaos. RAF pilots returned to Kent airfields, their aircraft largely intact. Debriefings focused not only on tactical success but also on observations of enemy behavior. Officers noted how the coordinated strikes had thrown German formations into disarray, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited in subsequent operations. The psychological dimension of the raid became a key point of discussion. It was clear that precision strikes inflicted as much fear as material damage. British command documented the operation meticulously. Logs recorded each squadron's flight path, altitude, and bomb release timing. Intelligence officers began analyzing German responses, identifying patterns of hesitation and miscommunication. These insights would inform future raids, ensuring that IAF strategy evolved with each engagement. The success of the morning strike was as much about lessons learned as objectives achieved. German reports painted a picture of confusion. Anti-aircraft crews admitted delays in response, often firing without effective coordination. Soldiers described scenes of panic, with men abandoning posts and seeking cover where none existed. Commanders at higher levels struggled to consolidate information, encountering gaps in reporting and communication. The raid had exposed vulnerabilities in both human and mechanical elements of German defense. At home in Britain, news of the operation bolstered morale. Reports in the press emphasized precision and efficiency rather than sheer destruction. The raid demonstrated that Britain could project power across the Channel, striking not indiscriminately but with carefully planned intent. This message resonated with a population still wary of enemy air raids and highlighted the growing competence of the RAF in offensive operations. The effectiveness of preparation and training became evident in post-raid analysis. Pilots credited rigorous rehearsals and discipline for the seamless execution. Ground crews were praised for their efficiency in readying aircraft under tight schedules. Leadership acknowledged that the operation's success rested on the cohesion of all elements, from intelligence gathering to final bomb release. Across the Channel, German commanders faced immediate challenges. Recovery from the raid required reorganizing scattered units, repairing damaged infrastructure, and reassessing defensive protocols. Even minor mistakes during the morning strikes had compounded into strategic setbacks. The sudden demonstration of British precision forced a re-evaluation of assumptions about coastal security. In strategic terms, the raid demonstrated that Britain's approach to air warfare had evolved. Success no longer relied solely on numerical superiority or overwhelming force. Timing, coordination, and intelligence-driven planning were now decisive factors. RAF Bomber Command had proven that a relatively small number of well-trained crews, executing a meticulously designed operation, could destabilize a larger, confident enemy. The immediate aftermath also underscored a lesson in psychological warfare. Panic had spread more quickly than the physical destruction, and that panic had tangible consequences. Units hesitated, misfired, and miscommunicated, compounding the damage. British planners understood that the effectiveness of their operations depended not only on bombs dropped but on exploiting the human reactions they induced. By the end of the first day's analysis, it was clear that the raid had accomplished its objectives. Material destruction was significant, but the disruption of German operations and morale had perhaps an even greater effect. British leadership recognized that such precision strikes, carefully planned and executed, could shift the balance along the Channel and provide a model for future offensive operations. In the days following the raid, German forces began to assess the broader consequences. Coastal defenses were evaluated, and gaps in radar coverage were scrutinized. Officers acknowledged that the precision and coordination of the British attack had exposed weaknesses in both communication and rapid response. Repairs and reorganizations were underway, but the psychological impact lingered. Soldiers reported lingering anxiety, unsure when or where the next strike might arrive. British leadership monitored these developments closely. Intelligence indicated that panic and confusion had disrupted German operational planning beyond the immediate target areas. Supplies could not be moved efficiently, reinforcements were delayed, and the chain of command remained disoriented. The effectiveness of a relatively small but precise operation had amplified far beyond its physical impact. Strategists noted that the raid demonstrated the potential of limited, high-precision strikes to undermine enemy confidence and disrupt logistics without the need for massed forces. The operation also boosted British morale. For the RAF, the success confirmed that disciplined planning and training could outweigh numerical disadvantages. Ground crews, pilots, and officers took pride in the operation's seamless execution. Confidence in Bomber Command's ability to conduct offensive operations increased, reinforcing a sense of purpose across the service. The raid became a benchmark for coordination and precision in planning subsequent sorties. German adjustments were methodical but reactive. Radar installations were reviewed, anti-aircraft crews retrained, and defensive strategies revised. However, the initial shock of the raid left lingering vulnerabilities. Commanders realized that assuming predictable enemy behavior was dangerous. British intelligence had exploited German complacency, and future operations would have to account for the increased vigilance this raid had inspired. In strategic terms, the raid underscored the evolving nature of the air war. Britain had demonstrated that mastery of timing, coordination, and precision could achieve effects disproportionate to the scale of the force deployed. It set a precedent. Well-trained, disciplined crews operating in synchronization could paralyze an enemy's operational capability, not merely damage infrastructure. The long-term operational impact was also evident. German units along the Channel coast were slower to respond to subsequent reconnaissance flights, wary of potential attacks. The psychological advantage gained by Britain extended beyond a single day. The raid had introduced a new dynamic. Enemy forces now had to anticipate precision strikes at unpredictable times, altering deployment patterns and defensive postures. Reports from surviving German personnel emphasized the effectiveness of coordination and timing. Panic had not been a fleeting reaction but a systemic breakdown of confidence in command and response. British analysis confirmed that exploiting these human factors was as crucial as targeting physical assets. The psychological dimension became a recognized factor in planning future operations. For the RAF, lessons from the raid influenced training, briefings, and tactical planning. Pilots and crews were debriefed extensively, identifying what had gone right and how techniques could be refined. The precision achieved was credited to preparation, discipline, and the resolve of every participant. These principles would guide subsequent operations, ensuring that Britain's approach remained calculated and effective. By the end of the week, the raid's consequences were clear. Material destruction had been significant, but its strategic and psychological effects had amplified its impact. Britain had not only demonstrated tactical superiority but had also set a benchmark for precision, coordination, and disciplined execution. The lessons learned would shape both immediate operations and the broader conduct of the air war along the Channel. The morning raid on the Channel coast exemplified a new chapter in Britain's air strategy. Precision, preparation, and discipline had achieved what sheer numbers often could not. British pilots demonstrated that mastery of timing and coordination could paralyze an enemy's defenses and instill uncertainty far beyond the physical damage inflicted. The operation underscored the importance of intelligence, training, and psychological insight. Every detail, from flight paths to bomb release timing, was calculated to exploit weaknesses in German defenses. Yet it was the human element that amplified success. Disciplined crews, resolute leadership, and the collective focus of men operating under pressure turned meticulous planning into decisive action. For the Germans, the raid was a stark lesson in vulnerability. Complacency, overconfidence, and assumptions about enemy behavior had been exposed. Panic and confusion had disrupted both immediate response and longer-term operations, demonstrating that warfare was as much a contest of nerves and organization as it was of material strength. In broader historical terms, the raid highlighted a shift in aerial warfare. Britain's ability to execute precise, coordinated strikes became a template for future operations. The emphasis on preparation, intelligence, and human discipline redefined what small, well-trained forces could achieve against numerically superior opponents. Yet the reflection extends beyond tactics. The raid revealed the intersection of strategy, technology, and human will. British pilots and crews operated with calm focus amid danger, embodying a mindset that valued calculated risk and disciplined execution. The operation became a testament to the effectiveness of mastery over chance, illustrating how thoughtful preparation could turn uncertainty into decisive advantage. Ultimately, the precision blitz on the Channel coast was more than a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of Britain's growing dominance in the air war, a moment when preparation, resolve, and strategic insight converged to reshape the enemy's perception of power. The lessons endured, influencing operations, morale, and the unfolding course of the conflict.